Episode 40 of the Tool Bags Up Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Sebastian Caballero, and guys, it's the first episode of the Cheat Sheet, our fantasy football segment here at Tool Bags Up. I'm so excited for this. If you know me, you know how passionate I am about fantasy football. Now, I know that finding three other people that are just as passionate was going to be hard, but I think I got them here. I got JT, I got Mikey Mike, and I have Austin. Guys, fantasy football is the most exciting time of the year. Fuck Christmas. It is fantasy football. Just wait a month from now when we're all drafting our teams. Like, it's literally fucking Christmas. Like, when you used to wake up as a little kid, it's like that Christmas day for me is draft day. Once I start picking my teams, holy shit, man. It's a different feeling, bro. Christmas is cool, but have you ever drafted for your fantasy football team? Guys, just real quick, I wanted your experiences because for most people watching this show, they probably play fantasy football, but maybe there are some newcomers here. Tell them about your experience playing fantasy football.
For me, it's a love-hate relationship. You love them, and then you hate it. You love it when you're on top, and then you want to have your gut feeling because you want to start, like you say, you want to start T.Y. Hilton every single time, but then all of a sudden, every single other week, he has 3 points. And then the next week, when you don't start him, he has 24. And it's always up and down when it comes to – that's why I always say it's a love-hate relationship. You always got to trust your gut. But it's always fun when you get to beat that one friend that you've been dying to beat. You've been talking trash this whole entire week for. And then you finally beat him by 40 points, or you finally beat him by that 1.2 decimal. And that's what brings the life into fantasy football for me, man.
Yeah, man. Honestly, for me, it's like right now I got some running back curse going on. So, like in 2016, I wanted to draft Elliott. The guy right before me took Elliott. I was stuck with Gurley. Terrible season. Next season, I was not going to take Gurley. The guy in front of me took Gurley. I was like, all right, fine, whatever. Gurley popped off that season. And then Saquon the year before, after that. And then last year I took Connor, who I wanted, and we all know how his season went. He got injured and all that. Before me, it was Dalvin Cook. I didn't think he was going to do anything. He only had 4 touchdowns the 2 years before combined. And so, yeah. So basically, if you want to do good in a season, draft a running back right before me. That's it. That's all you got to do. Well, yeah, man. It's a love-hate. And fantasy is the greatest thing in the world, but it can also ruin the entire week for you. So that's why it's great.
Yeah, definitely. I feel all you guys' pain. With me, fantasy football is it's really fun. It's really fun being able to manage your own team, put a player in when you want to, and also managing, like, if you think he's going to be doing better than this guy and whatnot. So that's really the most fun I get out of it, just projecting who's going to have a better day and whatnot. But besides that, I mean, I don't have the same curse as you with running backs. I had one year, the Saquon's rookie year, I had him and McCaffrey, and they both had a great year. So don't feel your pain on that one. But yeah, it's really tough when you start doing good and then you just also fall apart at the end. That's happened to me before. So it's a give and take, man. It is what it is, and you don't really have control. That's why it's a fantasy football.
Well, like we spoke off camera, this is probably the most stressful part of the year for me also. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to have some health issues when I'm older because of fantasy football, from all the stress and all the frustration. I mean, we were talking about it. I was on camera without a hat before the show, and I'm like, nah, let me get my hat because I am, my hair is thinning. Again, dude, like the stress that comes with fantasy football is major, but it's all worth it, dude. Like Mike was talking about, like that feeling that you get when you beat a really good friend of yours, or just that one person that just constantly talks shit, the Uri Martinez's of the world. It is it is all worth it, man. In the end, it is all worth it. I swear to God, it's one of the best feelings in the world. And it's just like Austin kind of said, you're your own general manager. You get to actually manage a team and everything that comes with it. I'm gonna break down fantasy football, just the very basics of it. We'll get into more detail. If you do want more detail on any specific part of fantasy football, go ahead and DM us at Toolbags Up, and we will answer all your questions, or we'll maybe talk about it here in a future episode. But let's just get down to the basics. So what is fantasy football? So fantasy football, fantasy sports in general, are virtual leagues where teams are made up of real athletes, and based on their real life performance, so what they actually do in their games, that player accumulates what's called fantasy points. Those fantasy points are used to actually score for your fantasy team. Now, how do you get these players to be on your team? These players will be drafted. You will actually have a draft for your league, and that usually happens before the start of the regular season. It would be smart to do that. Once you have your team selected, then you start playing games against the other teams in your league. Much like the real teams do, you will set what's called a starting lineup. Now, why is this important? Because only the points that your starters get, only the points that are received by the players in your starting lineup actually count towards your actual score. The players on the bench will also have a score, especially if they play in that game, but they will not be counted towards your actual score in your game against the other fantasy team. The team with the most points at the end of the week, so games will usually start on Thursdays. There might be some Saturday games later on in the season, but usually it's just Thursday, Sundays obviously, and then Monday nights. So at the end of Monday night, the team with the most fantasy points wins that week, and your record will go just as if it were a regular season game. You would be 1-0, say for week 1. The regular fantasy season usually goes from weeks 1 through 13. Reason being is because the playoffs for fantasy football still go through the regular season. Once the teams go into their actual playoffs, not every team is on there, so obviously that would kind of fuck up everything that you have going for your team. So the entire real NFL season is your entire regular season and fantasy playoff season. Weeks 1 through 13, and then weeks 14, 15, 16, and 17, if you play up to 17, are usually where the playoffs come in fantasy football. Depending on your playoff format and number of teams, your fantasy playoff rounds could be multiple weeks. So if your playoffs are just a 14 playoff, then you would play 14-15 for the first round, and then the championship round would be 16-17 or something along those lines. The person who wins out in the playoffs is crowned the champion of the league. So it doesn't matter what you do in the regular season, much like it does in real life. It's what you do in the playoffs, and the person that wins that last game of the playoffs is the champion. Now, there are multiple ways of playing fantasy, but we will discuss the primary two, which are standard and PPR. The main difference between the two is that you receive points for catches in PPR. That's PPR, points per reception, and standard does not. This is important because it will impact the way that you draft your team. What do I mean by that? There are players in the NFL that don't receive a high volume of catches, but do pick up a certain number of yards. There are certain running backs who don't catch passes out of the backfield, but do run for a lot of yardage, right? But if it was a PPR league, you might drop some of those players down on the list because they don't receive catches. If it doesn't matter, then obviously in the standard league, these players would be ranked a little bit different. Because most people do play points per reception, and it's honestly just a lot easier to explain it that way, we will always discuss it in a PPR form, receiving points per reception. If you do play standard, don't stress it. Just subtract the amount of catches to everything else that we talk about, and that is what your player score is, or the amount of points that we're talking about. So pretty simple stuff right there. And then obviously there's kicking and defense and all of that, but that's not really that important. We'll continue here. I want to talk to you guys about some of the experiences that you guys have had playing fantasy football, because like we've all mentioned, there's a love-hate relationship. There's a lot of stress, but there's also a lot of happiness that comes with this. Talk to me about the most interesting season you've had playing fantasy.
Damn, that's a good one. I mean, I think one of the most interesting ones that I ever had was when I think it was like the first 5 weeks or 4 weeks. I still remember this. This is why I'm saying this story. I was 0-4, lost my first 4 games. I had the lowest point total in the whole league. And out of nowhere, I ended up playing second place. I placed second place. I went all the way to the championship in my work league, and this was the big one. And I ended up, I mean, regardless, I ended up losing at the end of the day. But just to be down and having the least amount of points, and having to work my roster, and wait, this guy sucks. Let me just dump this guy. Let me pick up another free agent. Let me take her around. Let me try to make a trade with somebody. And it ended up being that I ended up getting second place. I worked my way up from 0-4. So that was probably one of my interesting seasons. I don't know if you guys have a better one, but that's it for me.
Yeah, man. I mean, a similar story to you, but the complete opposite. Dude, I was going undefeated one season. I had a strong team from running backs, wide receiver. I was at the top every single week, good amount of points every week, solid. But once it hit like week 7, week 8, it just went all crashing down. Injuries, and then my players had bye weeks, which from that season, I'm sure as you guys know, like once you play fantasy for years, you kind of know what to do and what not to do. Ever since that season, I make sure all my players do not have different bye weeks, and I make sure they have similar bye weeks, or if not the same one, that would be awesome. But that totally crashed my team down. I didn't even make the playoffs that year. It was terrible, but yeah, that's my interesting story. That was a bad year.
It happens.
Yeah, I've had some ups and downs in fantasy. I mean, there was like one of my first times ever playing fantasy. I was horrible. I mean, like had probably like the worst team. Not because player wise, it was just like I didn't know really how to put them in the right spots and really what to do with them. I ended up trading like half my team to like my cousin. I think he went on winning to the league. But yeah, same thing to JT, that I had pretty much almost an undefeated season going on, and then just sizzled out right there at the end, right when I really needed them. Just couldn't pull through.
So believe it or not, my most interesting season came last year. I was in 4 leagues. I really only try to plan 2, but if you ask me, I'm kind of a whore for fantasy football leagues. I'm not gonna say no. So I was in 4 leagues, and in 2 of my leagues, I finished as the number 1 seed, and in the other 2 leagues, one I started off 1-5, made it went undefeated the rest of the way, and ended up winning the championship. Actually, I just won out the rest of the season. And in my other league, I needed to like win the last game of the year, and I ended up getting into the playoffs as a 6 seed because somebody else lost, and I kind of made my way through, and I ended up winning that league as well. I was 6-6, and I won the league as a 6 seed. And then in the 2 leagues that I ended up as a number 1 seed, I got bounced in the first round. I got a first round bye and then got bounced. And that's usually how fantasy football works. Like, that is fantasy football. Like, that's how stressful it is. You can have the best team in the league. I think in the one league that JT and I had, there was this one guy that just hit on every single draft pick. Like, literally everyone that popped off last year was on his team. And sure enough, he was bounced in the first round. Like, it was the craziest thing, man. It's the craziest thing. And it's so frustrating. But just out of all the things that are frustrating with fantasy football, like, what is the thing that you guys hate the most?
So if I could say, so like how you're saying, like, the guy who had the number 1 team, I hit all on the right picks, people popping off. Majority of the time, those people who are popping off all the time, their team in real life is in a position to make the playoffs, and then their play kind of declines right before the playoffs, just so they can save themselves up for that time. And that is really critical. You want to have some people that you think are going to be fighting to the very end and really going to be producing at the end of the season when you really need it.
Yeah, man. The thing I hate the most is going into a game and the player, his status is up in the air. If he's going to play, if he's not going to play, is it going to be limited touches? And so I have Latavius Murray, who's my backup, who I could play, who, he's going to have maybe a decent game that day. But I can also start my starter. So it's just like, who do I go with from there? So once you get into the game, I mean, that's it. You're locked and loaded to go. But it's just always up in the air in those different scenarios. That's what I hate the most. Can't stand those.
my thing is when you're having to pick between two people, or maybe it's multiple people. Maybe you got two running backs or a running back and a wide receiver, then you don't know who you're gonna pick, and then you end up picking the one guy that only has 5 yards, one catch, with 2 yards of reception, and then that other guy that you left off, or you probably had him in your starting lineup, and then you put him in the bench because you thought he was gonna do good, pops off for 30 points or something like that. That's what kills me every single week. That's I hate that every year. It always happens at least maybe 1 or 2 weeks out of the season.
Something tells me you're not over the Ty Hilton thing, man.
That
Bro,
always happens. At least 1 or 2 weeks of the season it happens.
it's literally the inconsistency in players in their play. Like, I would rather have a guy that's consistently 12, 15 points every week than having a guy that'll get me 30 and then he'll get me 5 and then he'll get me 10 and then he'll get me 7 and then he'll get me 35 again. Like, dude, that is so frustrating because it could be the difference between you winning or losing against an opponent that you probably should beat. Like, it's the most frustrating thing not knowing, like, oh shit, like, is this guy gonna pop off? Whereas if you have somebody consistent, like last year, Austin Eckler was super consistent, right? Like, it was always nice that, like, all right, you don't have to worry about him. Like, at the very worst, he's gonna get you like 12 points. You get me? But then you have guys like Amari Cooper, like T.Y. Hilton. Back in the day, it was anybody named Doug, like Doug Baldwin, Doug Martin. Holy fuck, bro. I call those guys Mr. Inconsistent, bro. Like, that was their nickname for me. Like, Amari Cooper was Mr. Inconsistent this past year. But, like, those guys that you will have. I remember that one year, it was 2 years ago, where Amari Cooper would go off for like 39, and then you would play him the next year, and he would 4 points. And it would be like in a playoff game or something, or like a must-win game. It was super, super frustrating. And especially those guys that like choke against really easy opponents. Like, you very rarely get those cupcake games against really bad defenses, and all of a sudden, like, your star player just goes and gives you like 4 points. That is the most frustrating part to me. I guess the other part that's really frustrating is when you play in a league and you're always going to have one or two guys that maybe don't take it as seriously as you do. I try to avoid those leagues, but it's super frustrating. Like, for example, you're playing a team that that guy hasn't checked his fantasy league all week long, and then all of a sudden he pulls off a win somehow. You end up losing to that guy. That's really frustrating. And yeah, man. Or they don't start a kicker or something like that. Like, dude, like, fuck you, bro. It's the most frustrating thing in fantasy, bro. So I wanted to kind of get into this, and we'll dive into little secrets and gimmicks, guys. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show is because, I've been through it all, man. Like, this, again, we're talking about all this stress, but our job is to alleviate that stress for you as much as possible. We have plenty of experience playing fantasy football. I myself have 8 years of experience. I was that guy that when I started, I would draft 2 defenses and 2 kickers because I'm like, fuck, I'm eventually going to need a backup for their bye week. Like, my thinking, right? And those mistakes will cost you your league. Please do not do that. That's why we're here. We're going to teach you exactly everything that you're going to need to know, some tricks that we've learned over the years that have kind of given us an edge, as well as some don'ts. A lot of things that people do that think, oh, that's going to get me an advantage. JT kind of touched on one, with the bye weeks and things like that. But guys, let's start with JT here now that I mentioned him. What is one key do and one key don't that you specifically use in your fantasy football leagues?
Yeah, man. Obviously, the season starts with the draft. The waiver wire and the trades come with it. But, dude, starting with the draft, I think just 2 things to go out for that, like, I look out for the most is you're gonna draft your studs at the beginning of the draft, but in the middle to the end of the draft is when you need those people that are gonna help you get points throughout the season consistently. And one big thing that I look out for is wide receiver 2s, because they're not going to have that number 1 cornerback on them the whole game, and they're going to be focusing on that wide receiver 1 the whole time. So you know what, that guy's going to get some targets, and he might get good yards after the catch with that. Another thing is money makes the world go around, and NFL players are human. So if it's a contract year for them, most likely they're going to pop off that year. It happens all the time. You see it all the time. So that's another thing. If you want to dive really deep into it and look on their contracts, but a don't. Honestly, my biggest my biggest don't is like what I said earlier. Just don't draft don't draft different bye weeks consecutively or throughout the season. Try to stick to either 1 or 2 bye weeks with your players, because in the long run, it's gonna help you, because even though you're gonna do terrible maybe those 2 weeks, that's only 2 weeks instead of 6 weeks that you're without points, or 5 weeks that you're looking for points and you had to drop somebody and pick them up on the waiver wire. So yeah, those are my do's and don'ts, man.
Yeah, the bye week thing is one of the most important things too. I remember that happened to me. The same thing that you were saying, Sebastian, when you first started drafting. I didn't notice that whole bye week situation. And then once I already got my team, I have like 4 people out at the same time, and I'm here looking to put my backups in for my star players. They're all out in the same week, so it definitely takes away points from you and stuff like that. The biggest thing too, don't fall in for the whole hype about you need to draft running backs first and go running back heavy. Don't and maybe do what you got to do to get the best players available. Make sure, remember in PPR, you got to actually realize the whole thing. When if a running back can catch the ball, those are going to be points for you. The biggest thing with Austin Eckler, like these guys like Danny Woodhead, those guys, they're not going to give you a whole bunch of rushing yards, but they're going to catch the ball out of the backfield. They're going to give you maybe 10 points just in catches. They don't even have to have yardage, but they're going to give you 10 points just because they caught those passes. I'm sorry. So don't give them the hype. Just make sure you're getting some pass, or I guess catch heavy receivers and running backs. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's just go with your gut. Because if you go with stats and you go off of somebody else telling you what to do, you're probably going to end up doing the wrong thing. So that was one of my main things for how long I've been doing fantasy football. Don't listen to anybody else. Listen to yourself.
Yeah, you definitely got to go with what you feel is right. I mean, if you feel like picking a certain person at whatever spot you may be in is the right pick, then go all for it. Because if you have any doubt, guess what? You may pass on that guy. Someone else is going to pick him up. And guess what? That person may win the league with the person you passed on. So it's always just like, you just got to go with what you feel right. It feels right. And like what JT said with the bye weeks, what I like to do with the bye weeks is, let's say one guy has week 12, and then I'm going to make sure that I have someone to put in his place for that week. Like when I'm drafting, I make sure they don't have the same bye weeks or something sometimes. It just really depends on who's available and whatnot. And personally for PPR, I like how Mikey said that you get backs who catch the ball, because that was a big key factor for me having Christian McCaffrey one of these years, that he was literally catching the ball every other play. If not, he was running it. So it's really just who you feels right, and just plan out your season correctly. If you don't have a plan to your season, you're going to fail ultimately. Like you have to have some type of idea what you want to do throughout your season.
So I want to jump in because I think there's a little confusion here. And JT, correct me if I'm wrong. So you're one of the things, the thing with the bye week, you don't care about if these guys have the same bye week. Is that correct, or is that not?
Dude, I can care less, because if my 2 stud wide receivers have the same bye week and I have to bite the bullet just 1 week, and who knows, maybe my backups pop off that week. Maybe that's the week they pop off, then I'm all right with taking on that loss. But if I have to separate those bye weeks, then I'm risking 2 weeks right there of decrease in production. So I'm okay with giving up that 1 week, because even then, giving up that 1 week, who knows what your backups are going to do.
Yeah, just a quick example. I really don't know the bye weeks out of the top of my head right now. But say, for example, you draft Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Holy shit, what a team you have already. But say you have both of those guys, and you have one of them and you're contemplating on drafting the other, and it's like, well, they have the same bye week. If you really think about it, guys, you're not going to go undefeated in your fantasy football league. I've never seen it happen, to my knowledge, that I can remember. I've never seen it happen. Chances are you're probably going to lose, and you're going to lose to somebody that you probably shouldn't have lost to. That's how it works out. So for me, like, the bye weeks isn't necessarily like a super big deal. Like that was a mistake I used to make, was just kind of separate my weeks. And then that would have that problem that JT just kind of mentioned there. I would rather just, you know what, fuck it. If I got to take a loss, I'll take a loss. I'll play one of my backups and then just kind of roll the dice and hope for the best. Right. But, it really depends on your league and what team you have and who you're really going to bench and all that stuff. I wanted to start off with my do, and that's check the depth charts. Super important. This is going to help you guys draft because, yes, you may know the obvious names, the Saquons, the McCaffreys, the obvious picks that you're going to take. But you need to watch out for what we call sleepers that we'll get to here in the next few episodes on what sleepers are and who to look for. But you need to know who, if one guy goes down, who do you need to have your eye on? Who's going to replace him and become that guy? Very, very important. And this will help you, especially after round 5, where you're trying to decide, like JT said, looking for that wide receiver 2, or looking for that running back 2, looking for that maybe that sleeper tight end that you're looking for. Like, you have to study their depth charts. Who is going to get the majority of the playing time? Who's going to get the reps? Who has an opportunity to pop off? Because where you win and lose is basically on your later rounds. It's not your first overall pick. Your first overall pick is not going to win you the league. It's Can your 10th pick be a Patrick Mahomes? Can it be a Lamar Jackson? Can it be a Darren Waller? Can it be a Mark Andrews? Like, those are the type of people that you're looking for, and these are sleepers that were late round draft picks that have come out the last couple of years. Mahomes, yes, was a sleeper before he popped off his first year as a starter. My one don't is the obvious one, and this is something that a lot of people make this mistake. Do not draft a quarterback in the first round. Do not reach for a quarterback. Like, yes, I know there's only one Patrick Mahomes, and that'll be maybe like the first quarterback that I take. But if somebody takes him in the first round over a running back and a wide receiver, a skill position player, like, let them have it. Because there are just as many quarterbacks that will produce later on in the rounds. And this is the thing. No quarterback ever repeats as the number one quarterback. We saw this last year. Like, Mahomes was QB1 2 years ago. Lamar was a QB1 this year. And I guarantee you there will be a new QB1 this year that nobody expects. So don't go ahead and reach for a quarterback early on in the draft. I would hold off on those as long as possible. The one thing I did want to throw this in there because it's kind of like a pro and a con, a do and a don't, is drafting star players, drafting names. This is a do and this is a don't. And what I mean by that is this really depends on the league. I do this a lot. Like, for example, Odell is a perfect example. Odell is a name, and there is people that will overvalue or overpay for Odell just because he's Odell, right? So where the do would be is, like, let's say if you really have no idea who you want to pick, you're really not in love with anybody that's out there, go ahead and draft the name and use that as trade bait, which we'll get into trades in a later episode. Draft a name, use them as trade bait. Where you don't want to draft a name is, for example, early on, or maybe you're gonna reach for a player, like, say he's like a Jarvis Landry was one of those guys. Jarvis Landry was ranked, I think, just inside of the top 100 players last year. He was maybe like the 90th ranked player, and in a couple of my leagues he was taken in the 3rd round. Like, people were reaching for him, and there were so many studs available. I think Stephon Diggs was still available and things like that. They were drafting Jarvis Landry. Guy was a Dolphins fan. Don't do that. Do not reach for a name. Reach for production, guys. You have to reach for production, not for names. Any final thoughts here, guys?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, like you said, production, but you want to look for a running back who's going to get a lot of attempts during the day. You don't want to look for a pass-heavy offense running back. They might get catches, but at the same time, you do want them to get yards on the ground. Same thing, even though catches count towards fantasy points, but you also want a lot of targets to your receivers, because the more targets mean the more receptions. So those are probably like a couple extra things just to go over.
My 2 cents is study. Make sure you guys are looking at who you're going to be drafting. Make sure you know what their statuses are. And then also, and this is like the most important thing, make sure that you're always following the cheat sheet, because we're going to give you the best answers to every single fantasy football question that you guys have. All right?
Drop the mic, baby. Drop the mic.
I love the end of what Mike said there. But yeah, definitely just be on top of the ball. You can't go in there and expecting, hey, I'm gonna pick this guy, and this guy. Last year I picked AJ Green, and he was pretty much injured the entire year, and I was just like smacking my head because I was so frustrated. So just don't do what I did last year, and pay attention to who's injured, who's not, and just definitely go in there with a right mindset.
Study, absolutely. We have everything that you need to know here on the cheat sheet. You don't have to do a damn thing, but just tune in every single Wednesday for the next 23 weeks. Tune in every Wednesday for the next 23 weeks, and you will have an edge in your fantasy football league. Everything that you need to know, we will answer for you. And any questions that you have, something that we may not cover, you need to go ahead and contact us ASAP. During the actual regular season, we're actually going to live stream before the games start to answer those questions. Who should you start at receiver? Who should you sit? Who should be your flex? Who's got a great matchup? Things like that. Like the day of the games, we will be there to kind of just answer all your questions, everything that you need to know pre games before on Thursday. You will have our list of players to start during the week, players to sit, guys that are guaranteed hits, some sleepers to watch out for, some busts. Like literally everything that you need to know will be on this show. We're going to go through the draft process, break it down. We might even we're definitely going to do a mock draft here just to kind of give you a feel of what it's like. And most importantly, next week, we're going to start ranking players, ranking positions. Next week is the quarterback position. This one is important. In case you don't get Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, you need to know who you need to keep an eye on. I'll give you a hint. Do not draft Big Ben. Don't listen to Mike. Don't draft Big Ben this year.
You'll be surprised where I ranked him. You'll be surprised where I ranked him.
He probably has him in the top 5. My
No.
God.
Yeah, easily.
I gotta let my emotions not get the best out of me. Okay, so this is non-biased top 20. Okay, you'll be surprised.
Looking forward to doing more episodes with these guys. Again, we got quarterback rankings, running back rankings, wide receiver rankings, tight end, defense, and kickers. Mock draft coming up, breaking down the drafts. And hopefully by the end of all that, we will start the regular season on time. Looking forward to all of that. That's all for this one, guys. Thank you guys for joining me. See you next week.
See you guys.
So really interesting first episode there of the cheat sheet. Really looking forward to doing more episodes again with these guys. I mean, guys, this is probably my favorite part of the year. It's the most exciting time. This is my Christmas right here. This is what I look forward to every single year. Preparing, getting ready for fantasy football drafts. I mean, I'm that type of guy that'll be up at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday just looking for different trades to make, looking for different players to pick up. Like, I am that obsessed about this. So, I'm that obsessive so that you guys don't have to be that. Just watch the cheat sheet and you'll be all right. That's going to be all for our first episode of the cheat sheet. Don't forget to like and subscribe, especially on our YouTube channel, guys. We are on YouTube. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify. We are on iHeartRadio. Make sure you like and subscribe, especially now with the cheat sheet. You're going to want to keep an eye on this segment to give you an edge every single week during your fantasy football year. You do not have to lose anymore. You don't have to lose your fantasy league anymore. Everything that you need to know will be on this show. Until next time, I'm signing off.